That's right, yeah.
Okay. So we've got bookings for somewhere around 80 people. But there's people that have turned up we didn't expect. And
is it going to be available afterwards?
Yeah, it's available on Facebook. Yeah. Another seat back here.
so
We've got another seat back here for anyone.
As well. So I think we've got about 80, which is about capacity.
Is that for Tom? Yeah. Yeah, there's one back
I
here.
think that says something about the conference. Oh, there's a seat up the back. There's one seat up the back.
Yep, where do we want this? Is it better up over there? Oh, yeah, Grant.
That's yours, Grant.
That's mine.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, well, I'm trying to see. Everyone standing looks to be quite young. And then there are some few seats over there.
What I thought I might do first off is just play you the trailer from the conference. I sent out links in some of the invitations, so hopefully most of you have some idea about what the conference was about, because it's really hard to give an impression between 4 people on a 3-day conference with 1,500 people and something like 7 or 8 speeches a day, I think, plus dinners in the evening. So I thought this might just set the scene. And
we at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship do not believe that humanity is necessarily and inevitably teetering on the brink of apocalyptic disaster. We do not believe that we are beings primarily motivated by lust for power and the desire to dominate. We do not regard ourselves or our fellow citizens as destructive forces living in an alien relationship to the pristine and pure natural world.
If you look out into the world at the moment, there are a series of narratives out there, these stories that we're telling ourselves, that are actually determining a lot of our global behaviour. If you've got children, you're exposed to some of this in a really visceral way, and you see your children coming home fearful about the future. There's this sort of cataclysmic belief that the future is dangerous, and somehow we are to blame.
There is an epidemic mental health crisis worldwide, in great part due to the breakdown of the social fabric and confusion over values, where economic prosperity, work, and materialism is prioritized over family.
And so the despair that we see around us, right, the breakdown of all of these social connections is related to a vision of the human being which sees the person as just a consumer. Promoting that, reducing humans to consumers, or criticizing it and criticizing humans for being parasites on the world.
But what is a better story? What is the better story that we can tell that will enable us to walk forward the way we need to walk forward as societies and nations? That is really going to be the big theme.
And it's time to bring a more optimistic vision and to believe in ourselves, in our civilization, in the things that made it such an extraordinary civilization.
We need to formulate a different vision, and I think that we have in our traditions, we have in our great theological movements of the West in the past 2,000 years, we have the possibility of formulating a different vision of humans. Humans that exist in love with each other, that are submitted to the transcendent good, and that can work together towards a better future.
The rejection of our traditional beliefs have not produced viable alternative narratives, only deconstructionist theories. We must reinvigorate our sense of citizenship. We must encourage one another to serve, to step up, to lead with courage wherever leadership is needed. The ARC network that I'm a part of will seek to address these goals and more.
If we get this right, if we can give people confidence again in our identity as people and communities and nations, then we'll start to reverse some of the more negative trends that have accompanied the more positive ones. So hopefully it can have a very long-lasting impact. ARC is emerging already as a wonderful community of people who are just full of hope for the way forward and want to bring in a different culture and a different vision for where we can go as a people.
I believe in great minds meeting and looking together for solutions. You cannot overestimate the impact of an idea.
There is a greater narrative that we can all chime in on for the things that we all want together, which is human flourishing, human prosperity, human well-being, all moored to hope.
We posit that men and women of faith and decisiveness, made in the image of God, can arrange their affairs with care and attention so that abundance and opportunity could be available for all. We hope to encourage the development of an alternative pathway uphill out of both tyranny and the desert, stabilizing, unifying, and compelling to men and women of sound judgment and free will. Welcome aboard the Ark.
One day, but not right now. Over 99%.
We're a free enterprise outfit. I don't begrudge YouTube advertising for all that it gives us for nothing. So, welcome here.
Birthing new ideas, bro.
I won't be. Welcome everyone here tonight. Thank you all for coming. I think it says something about the buzz that the creators of the art managed to imbue their creation with, that you've all turned up. They've got quite a buzz going. And I think you'll find when you listen to the four of us that were involved either as organisers and participants or just participants, that we came back with quite a buzz. So tonight you're going to hear first from Amanda Stoker. Amanda was Senator for Queensland. Unfortunately not anymore, but she's not lost to the political sphere. She's almost certain, and I say almost because one doesn't want to get ahead of oneself in politics, to be the next member for Woodgeroo, which is the old city parliament. So we'll hear from Amanda. We'll hear from Dan Ryan, who's one of our directors. Dan's a solicitor. He's one of the co-founders of the Australian Institute for Progress, so he's more than just a director. He was a solicitor in Hong Kong and was on the board of the Lion Rock Institute there. He's still a solicitor and obviously on our board and active in a number of areas. Campbell Newman really needs, as they say, no introduction. He's on our board as well, and one of the best board appointments I think we've made. So I'm a big fan of Campbell's and keen to defend his record at various levels of government, where he's served us as a Lord Mayor here and also as the Premier of the state. And I'll also be giving some of my impressions. You know, as I say, huge work, 3 days. How do we deal with it? So what I thought we'd do is we'd ask Amanda to speak for somewhere around 10 minutes or a bit more. I don't want speeches to go for more, talks are not really speeches, but more than about 30, 35 minutes. So, but Amanda was one of the organisers, so I think she can give us an insight into what they were trying to achieve, whether they think they achieved it, what she got out of it, and any other observations she wants to make. Then I thought we might go to Dan Campbell and then me last, because it's always hardest to do the last position because everyone else steals you notes. So as the host tonight, that's where I should be. And then I thought we'd just open it up for questions and do a conversation as possible. We've got a second microphone here somewhere, haven't we, Damien? And this system seems to work really well. It's the first time, so Let's have a good evening, see where we go. I think probably the art people aren't entirely sure where they're going. It's possibly a little bit like the dog that caught the bus. What do you do with it? You chase it and caught it. So I think there's probably a creative process that could come out of this in terms of where we think, where you think, having heard all of us talk and having some awareness of it, it might go and it might be valuable in the Australian context. So Amanda.
Hello one and all. It's a real privilege to be with you this evening, and I really thank you for taking the time not just to listen to our speakers tonight, but to support the Australian Institute for Progress, a very worthwhile organisation in this city and this state, and one who I fondly remember a meeting at the Ship Inn, what feels like a long, long time ago, about putting it together. It's great to see it still kicking goals and even more good things to come. My job tonight is to tell you a little bit about what ARC was intended to do, and maybe give some reflections on the extent to which we got there. It was born out of essentially the friendship of three people whose names you will probably know. Baroness Philippa Stroud, based in the UK, Jordan Peterson, who you will all know from Canada, and our former Prime Minister John Anderson, all of whom are big thinkers, all of whom are perplexed by the direction in which our Western civilization has been travelling, and all of whom are doers, and so we're prepared to put together something of an effort to make a difference in turning that around. And the question around which ARC was organised was this. So much of the political narrative that characterises the modern age, to an extent this emanates out of the World Economic Forum, but also from other places, is the product of this postmodern view of the world. And it is fundamentally about how our future is going to be one of scarcity and not abundance. It's one about our decline as a civilization, one in which we are forced to think of things in terms of increasing inequality rather than any other metric, and ultimately which rests upon a play to the human emotion of fear. And so ARC was organised to say, well, is that as good as it gets? Or is there a better story? Is that our inevitable future? Or can more optimistic and action-oriented people make the future that lies ahead something much better than that which the apocalyptic types would suggest? And so it has in many ways a very idealistic vision. I think that's its strength. Some might say it became a little philosophical and not practical enough. Those criticisms are sometimes fair, but ultimately, before you get to action, you have to have the big thoughts. You have to get yourselves on the same page about which direction you should row the boat in before you get to rowing the boat. And that's what I think of this first ARC conference as seeking to do. To get everybody to the point where they share a vision of what the future should be, and equip them with the language and some of the tools to be able to, in their own sphere, in their own way, and in their own domain, to share that hope-filled vision in their own spheres of influence. So we tried to go about assembling a program of speakers, and I should say, for transparency, I was a part of the organising committee for Australia, but there were committees from a whole lot of different countries. In fact, we had over 70 nations represented at the conference, an extraordinary thing for a first go. There were 1,500 delegates from around the world in what was a sellout conference. If we had the capacity, there was demand to do at least double that. We quite literally couldn't find a venue that would accommodate as much demand as we had. There were over 100 parliamentarians from across the world who attended, and a really strong contingent from Australia, but also many from the EU, which I think is significant because their parliamentary and cultural traditions can sometimes be a little different to the way that we do these things. There was a strong turnout from the UK and also from the US. There were over 200 people whose contribution is in the academic or in the sphere of being a public intellectual. That's significant because they're people who spend all of their time thinking and talking about big ideas to relatively large audiences. There were over 200 business leaders, which I think is significant. When we think about how the corporate world seems so woke and captured, it was really encouraging to see a number of business leaders in attendance, although there's definitely room for more. And there were dozens of social media influencers. And while that can sound like a bit of a modern and invented kind of job, it nevertheless means that each one of those, to count them as an influencer, they needed to have over 500,000 people who followed their work. And when you think about that multiplier effect for what went on at the conference, along with the reach of traditional media, even to the Australian Parliament, since the Prime Minister and Treasurer want to call it the Cook Conference, it's had an impact that reaches well beyond the 1,500 people that were in the room. And that is in itself kind of exciting. The things that we wanted to do were to show from a position of good research and good evidence, not just sort of spouting ideology for its own sake, but really rooted in the evidence we could discern from the world as we see it now, a hope-filled vision of what the future can be if we decide to make it so. We wanted to critically examine the foundations of Western civilization, to, in many ways, show the value of relaying that foundation for the time to come. Because by helping people understand the historic foundations of our present prosperity, we can in many ways establish a future, particularly for people in the developing world, that's beyond their present wildest dreams. And those very dreams will be crushed by the alternate vision that's being offered by those of the postmodernist persuasion. We wanted to craft a vision that was about abundance and opportunity, rather than that scarcity and decline narrative that's so strong at present. And to do that from a position of good science and good evidence. We wanted to re-examine the way we think about responsibility and purpose. So much of the social problems that we see in our local community, but in Western civilization more generally, can be linked to people acting out of a position of despair when we think about the mental health crisis many people face. It can be linked to a lack of clarity around the nature of personal responsibility when it comes to matters around crime and addiction. It can also be about misunderstandings about the role of government and the extent to which we should want the state or the family to be the place where problems are solved and decisions made. And fundamentally, while there were a lot of people who, to use Australian parlance, wear a blue t-shirt, were in the room, we didn't want it to be a conservative-only conference or a libertarian-only conference. It needed to be a broad church because the job ahead is large, and I guess like the biblical kind of arc, it needs to be able to fit a whole lot of slightly different views of the world aboard. So we tried to explore creative solutions to the challenges that define our era in each of those spaces. And we wanted to emerge with a new cultural story for Western civilization. It's a big thing to pitch for. Upon that, we wanted to build a new and more positive identity for what it means to be an individual in this time, in this society. And we wanted to offer some pathways to solve the problems that we face so that we can have an optimistic future around what the families of the future should look forward to, what free enterprise and good governance should look like into the future. And we really wanted to examine the questions of affordable energy and environmental stewardship. Those last two things are the areas in which I contributed most in the, shall we say, debates, in the presentations that were made up. And so I can answer some more questions about that if time permits. But fundamentally, we wanted to reconcile this idea that when we think about it, life has improved so dramatically over the past few centuries for quite literally everyone everywhere. Even the poorest people in the world, in the most precarious places, have had their standards of living increase extraordinarily as a consequence of liberal democracy, capitalism, things that in the present public narrative are almost treated like dirty words. We live longer, we are better educated in broad terms as a society than we have been at any other time in history, and we have, again, by the worldwide numbers, more people with access to fresh water, food, energy and resources than at any time in the history of the world. It really has been an age of abundance, and yet the narrative that comes out of so much of the political space is one of permacrisis. It's leading people to feel destabilised and anxious, and many people feel like they're struggling to make ends meet as a consequence of policies that reinforce that permacrisis narrative. And all signs pointed to the idea that despite that abundance, the West seemed to have lost its confidence in itself. Many of you will have engaged with the videos that have been put online from many of the speakers. I don't propose to go there only because I couldn't do it anywhere near as well as those who have contributed in those videos have. Although I, of course, encourage you to look at those about superabundance and particularly the Australian case study in relation to the cost of getting to net zero, to which I had the privilege of contributing. But I want to use the time that remains to say a few things about what I think we did well, and a few things about what I think maybe didn't totally hit the mark or a room for improvement, and then talk a little bit about what's next, if that's okay. Things that I think we did really well were there was only one room and everyone was in it. So why does that matter? Isn't it good to have breakout rooms where people can gather around their areas of interest? Well, given we have so many people in attendance who had a political role, it's my observation that the ambitious political types want to talk about economic things and not social things. And yet, all of the evidence we have assembled in ARC indicated that if we aren't able to address some of the pressing social problems that we face, whether that's about breakdown in family structures or the feeling of being lost or lacking purpose that's so common in young men, problems of fatherlessness, problems of women struggling to be able to commit the time necessary to raise children, fathers too. If we aren't able to engage with those social problems, well, you're never going to be able to get the economic outcomes you want either. By way of example, if you've got a society racked with addiction and mental health crises, well, good luck getting small government and lower taxes. It's not going to happen. But by forcing everybody to be in the same room, rather than having the opportunity to opt out of policy areas about which they might have felt uncomfortable, they're actually given the opportunity to make connections between policy areas that might not have necessarily been their preferred bag to carry. The next thing I'd say that was done well was to order the program to just questions of policy and politics, but also the arts and matters of culture. Now, sometimes that can seem like a bit of an indulgence, and I can understand that perception. But until we really grapple with the idea that culture is downstream from values and politics is downstream from culture, then we're never really going to do more than get in at the last stage. But if we can understand the link between what we deeply believe to be the purpose of life and the way that manifests in culture, well, then we might be on to a new way to make an impact. And so instead of framing it around political ideas that we love, like hope, reward, and opportunity, to use a particularly good way of describing some of the things that I and many of you will be passionate about, we instead ordered it around what is true, good, and beautiful, which might sound a little bit more biblical or religious, but in fact you can think about it in that way, or you can think about it in relation to the arts, or you can think about it in relation to what should be the objects of good public policy. If it's not true, we shouldn't be pursuing it. If it's not good, we shouldn't be pursuing it. And if it doesn't in some way enhance beauty, and I don't mean in the superficial to look at sense, but in the manifestation of the goodness of humanity sense, well, then perhaps it deserves revisiting. I mentioned that a strength was that everything was evidence-based. You know, when Michael Schellenberger fronts the stage to talk about the way that aspects of the so-called green movement have gone awry, it was laden with the data needed to be able to prove the point, and we were able to share that data among delegates from 70 countries so that they could have the tools they needed to go back and fight the good fight. Similarly, we commissioned research papers as an organising committee to make sure that we were not just rehashing what was already out there, but presenting some new concepts or new ways of evidencing theories that could be useful as people went back to prosecute their cases. And all of those things, I think, were real strengths. If I'm frank, there are aspects in which we can improve for next time, I think. There were moments where the tastes of a diverse international audience might have been a bit confronting for Australians. There were moments where it descended into the very theatrical, and I think as a relatively laid-back Australian audience, sometimes that was pretty full-on for us. I don't know, maybe some of the other speakers will have their own thoughts on that. But there were times when it was quite theatrical in a way that maybe had an American or other nations' style behind it, and that was really different for us. It's not necessarily bad, but it definitely created, I think, moments in which we were challenged. There was also, I think, an interesting tension to manage between the understanding that the Judeo-Christian tradition is super important to Western civilization, without wanting to make this an evangelical conference. It wasn't a church gathering, it was about ideas that go beyond the faith. It needed to be an environment in which people from a whole range of different belief systems could come together. And there was probably one or two moments in which over-enthusiastic speakers might have missed the mark a touch. But for the most part, I think it's fair to say it represents an outstanding reorienting of the way that, shall we say, the non-WEF forces think about the future in a way that's overwhelmingly optimistic. And I think delegates left with a real buzz about what lies ahead, energised to be able to contribute in their space and in their function in the world, and in a way that gives me great hope about a future that's going to be so much more than the postmodernists would suggest. I hope that you've got something out of what you've seen of the better story that ARC tried to present. And I hope that there will be the opportunity for some, maybe all, of you to participate in the next version of ARC when it comes together in February of 2025. And, subject to the discussion that Graham's flagged for later on today, that there might be ways that we can all play a role in advancing those good ideas here at home and in the Asia-Pacific region in the time between. Thank you very much for your support of ARC and of our
Thanks, Amanda. I'll just ask Dan to orchestrate it.
Yep. So this is going to be like my holiday snaps of London type of explanation, because that's very boring. I'll keep it quite brief and snappy. How is ARC different to other conservative libertarian think tank conferences and the like that I've attended in the past? And I've been to a lot. In Hong Kong, we used to have Grover Norquist come out from Americans for Tax Reform, and Liberty Fest and CPAC and all the rest of it that have been doing their good thing. ARC was different in tone to begin with. There was no, we're here to trigger lefties and eat peanuts and all that peanuts type of attitude. It was child of Amanda Stoker. It was very earnest and thoughtful, sincere, wholesome. It had that attitude. The people there, which is not to say it wasn't. So there were conferences that had more provocative ideas and sort of ones that make you potentially think. But that, in a way, was ARC's strength, because it wasn't saying unconservative or interesting things. I mean, it was quite clear that it was anti-net zero. It was quite clear that it was anti-ESG non-system, and certainly the way it's been implemented by the World Economic Forum. It was saying some very radical things about family policy, which, none of these things are really accepted in here other circles in political discussion easily. It was very sympathetic to Christianity, and it was very sympathetic to the roots of the Christian West, which again is not something that you typically get. It also had very high quality people there. I actually think we should embrace the fact that ARC is an alternative or a replacement to the WEF. The people there were smarter, more wholesome, better looking. John Anderson is a much nicer, better person, more thoughtful person than a Carl Schwab. Amanda and Holly Valance and Louise Perry and all the rest of the babes there, that's so much nicer than Greta, right? Saying much more interesting things. And you had people there, it was so refreshing, you had people there, and I've been professionally worked internationally, had people there from the City of London that you could put in front of the CBA board, the RBA board, and those guys would have to listen because they know, finance better than those guys. And they will tell you that the ESG nonsense is nuts. And so it was very important, and I'm sure this was in the design, that it couldn't be dismissed as fringe. That it was credible, so that the message and the sort of reputation that it would generate would be so much better, so that it could legitimately be a replacement to, talkfests like the WEF. My criticisms, and in the best way, should be taken in the best way. It's thought provoking. You're like, what do we make of this thing? It was a little bit of ideologically putting without a theme, I think. It had, and that was necessary because you've got to get these people together from the notoriously fractious right in the same room. But there was clearly a conflict between, Kevin McCarthy, who was the former Speaker of the Congress, came out and gave this, reheated Reaganism type of speech. And I was like, if this is going to be the temper of and the message of the audience, then they're not really in touch with the times. Fortunately, the next speaker along, backbench MP Miriam Cates, who I think gave the best speech at the conference, was a completely different flavour. She recognised the reality that this is not 1980. When trading with China was nice and made all sense, and David Ricardo would have ticked off on it. It wasn't. The birth rates in the West are plummeting. It's not sunny, optimistic Reagan's California, right? We need to do something about it. And Eric Commissar, who spoke, gave the impression, which was galvanizing, that we should move heaven and earth in public policy to make it much and build all the incentives in public policy necessary so that it's mums can raise kids, families can stay together, and that there are financial, moral, and other incentives to make that role worthwhile. And that was the most moving and then then there was the quirky stuff. I mean, at some point there, I thought, Jesus, Philippa Shrout must hold these garden parties when the heels come off and the wine gets drunk and the Les Mis gets pumped up really to the limit and it all gets a bit crazy. Because there was a little, Jordan Peterson's a quirky guy. He reminds me of like a jazz singer, Louis Armstrong. He goes up and down, and you wonder whether he'll land his sentences, and you're trying to follow him this, that, and the other. So look, it had some interesting aspects. It had a different character to it. I genuinely think it should have legs. It should bill itself as a WEF. It should go after those guys. It shouldn't be afraid of saying we're a replacement to it. After the conference finished, I caught up with a corporate guy who attended WEF. They're not all nutcases that attend those conferences, so you've got to work out how we can pull across some of those corporate guys, because we're building an institution here, we're not building a kind of rebel-based Stormy Empire. I think that's the role that our ARC should play. And one of the things he said is there should be some breakout sessions for corporate other types, so you can pull across, so that the guys from mainstream Australia that we all have, no one would love and hate, feel comfortable coming to an ARC session, so that we can, regain the commanding heights of the economy and the cultural commanding heights as well, because that should be the long-term aspiration. Otherwise, it can't just be a protest conference. It can't just be a conference throwing rocks from the outside. It really has to be ambitious, and take the city up. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. I think we're at the same conference. It's just interesting how different people remember different things. I was sitting there thinking I don't really remember anything that Marie and Kate said. But,
She was my favourite.
Anyway, your turn.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Graham. Well, people have views of yours truly, and perhaps what I'm about to say is really going to surprise you. I've never been to a more motivational, uplifting, inspirational, incredible event in my life. And at the risk of channeling some of the stuff about, there was criticism about it being overly religious, it was a church-like experience. It was evangelical. In the final wrap-up speech, Jordan Peterson, started to cry during his speech, and you'll probably see it on the YouTube video. But I share with you, without shame, unapologetically, that on 2 occasions during that conference, I was there with tears running down my face. In fact, in one of them, there was the poet who spoke. I literally had to hold it together so I didn't start sobbing audibly to the people around me. And I was trying to find whether that particular YouTube video was up. There was another one by this guy, but it was extraordinary. So I'm really, really glad that I went. And I didn't know what to expect. But if I can give you one word that stands out, that what it was all about was this. It's about values. Values. That's what it's all about. And I say to you this evening, I would have been a better politician if I had been to an art conference before I went through my 20 years, I suppose, up to today in politics. I would have been much more effective, far more authentic, far more successful probably in the final analysis if I had been to that conference. I saw ARC as being the most critical and seminal event of the last 20 years for Western civilization. I don't believe I'm overstating it. It was the right event, but probably 5 to 10 years too late. Because, ladies and gentlemen, there is so much that now has to be done. because I agree with both Amanda's interpretation and about what it was all about and what she said, and then what Dan saw about it, and I'm sure Graham will also then fill in some other things. But we actually have to stand up and be counted. We actually have to build a movement, and that's what I wanted to speak about. We've got to take this torch forward right now and get other people on this train. And we don't have to agree, but what we have to do is stand up and say profoundly what we have in Western democracy is good. It is inherently a force for good. It has taken people forward. As Amanda was saying, we are, across the globe, even the poorest people in Africa are more prosperous in terms of their way of life through all our societies across the globe than ever before. You know, billions of people have been lifted out of poverty in the last 100 years, and we need to talk about it. And we need to talk about the progress that we've made. You know, the Brits got rid of slavery, and yet now we're pulling down statues because someone owned a slave once, or you know, financed a company or a shipping line that were involved in slavery. It's preposterous. We need to stand up and speak up and talk about the great good and the progress that has been made from Western democracy and our values. So, I've almost said enough already, but just to really wind up what needs to happen. Well, I don't know that I want to wait till 2025, but I'll go to that. I will go to the next ARC conference. So I just need to reflect on that. The calibre of the speakers was extraordinary. I've never been to a conference where there were just so many amazing people speaking, the thought leadership, the way that they delivered. I was in awe and very humbled, by the way, just seeing them in action. So I would like to go to 2025, but I think we need something in 2024 where we have ARC Australia going. But we also need to mobilise, and on from, say, ARC 2024 Australia, we need to build this movement in this country and globally where we really go out and engage in some key areas. One's in political parties, I'll come back to that. In the media, in the arts and culture, in our universities and our schools, in our bureaucracies and in business. We need to go out, depending on what our role is, we need to engage with people in those areas, and we need to say, look, there is an alternative vision. And it actually is, as Amanda said, it's a positive vision. We need to do that. So my final thought is there are quite a few people who we know, they're dear friends of ours from years in the LNP, and we're no longer members, less of myself, but I just say that across the nation, I look across the field of political leaders and present company accepted, who might be the great white hope, but I'll just move on. Apart from Peter Dutton, I don't see anyone who, and by the way, he's been increasingly, I think, showing leadership and being prepared to cut a course and say, this is what we stand for, and we will go this direction, particularly I'm referring to, say, his fight against anti-Semitism and the like, and defending Israel and the Jewish community. But he is pushing a course. But sadly, in our state divisions, for instance, the state divisions of the Liberal Party and the Liberal National Party, we need people like yourselves to get back in there and start to push for our politicians to reflect those values. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Campbell. I probably should have got you to go last, I think. I think we've been a better last speech than what I've got to say. I guess we know what happened now. I'm sort of tending to be a bit more reflective about what it's about. One of the strong things that came through that hasn't been touched upon is this dynamic in the West, which people in universities call populism, and the rest of us call democracy. every session started off, it wasn't a chamber orchestra because there's a definition for chamber orchestra, and it didn't match the definition, but it was an orchestra in a chamber. And they played the Fanfare of the Common Man at the beginning of each morning. And at the end, I don't know whether you remember Hillary Clinton talking about a basket of deplorables. And I knew that Donald Trump was a good show to win when at the next campaign rally he had this banner up the back which cribbed from Les Miserables, and it had Les Deplorables. And I think he played the same music that they finished the conference on when he came in, which was, do you hear the people marching or singing. So there was a conscious pitch to that part of society, which I think is where we ought to be. You know, that's where I think our best leaders have come from in the past, from both sides. They're people who may well have had a university education, but grew up in a lower middle, upper lower class household where they were in touch with how average people get to see society. But it also had this really strong cultural background to it. And that's something that we've tried to put into the Institute of Progress. I mean, why is it called the Australian Institute of Progress? Because we were sick and tired of the left saying that they were progressive when they were regressive. And progress used to be one of our values. And progress societies are around every little town in Australia because that's what Australia used to be about, not waiting for the government to do things, but getting out and doing things yourself. So we were quite conscious of getting that in, but a lot of politicians on the right and the centre right, they don't think so much about culture. They tend to come from the professions. They're very good at manipulating abstracts. You know, they're accountants, they're lawyers. You don't have to tell the story to a judge. The judge already knows what the story is. It's how do these facts fit in here? Well, yeah, okay, you do have to tell a bit of a story, but it's not an imaginative story like they were talking about at the conference, and that is a plank that's been missing. There was a very strong Christian undercurrent to it, which, for example, I spoke to Mark Latham, he said, mate, this wouldn't fly in Australia. And I thought, probably wouldn't. Thought about it a bit since, and you can't run away from our Judeo-Christian background. You know, it's that tells us that everyone has inherent dignity, equal worth as people. Might not be equal worth in your bank balance, but equal worth as people. So when you come before a judge, when you come before your fellow human beings, you should be treated just like everyone else. That is, there's no other religion that I can think of that has that as an underpinning. And it doesn't come from classical philosophy. In the Roman world, you're either a citizen or you weren't. And if you weren't, they did all sorts of dreadful things to you. You didn't have inherent dignity because of your humanity. So I don't think we can run away from that. But I think that perhaps the art needs to somehow bring church people into the orbit, because I think they have to do some of the work themselves, because Christianity as it is today is not necessarily that sort of Christianity. And something I'm trying to work up is the idea that wokeness is actually a heretical form of Christianity, a form of Christianity that doesn't matter whether you're a Catholic or a Protestant or Orthodox or Nestorian or Coptic, you would recognise it as not being authentically Christian. So it's a pretty bad heresy. It's one that does away with the necessity for Jesus to die for your sins, which for a Christian is so, what's the purpose of it? Why do you got crosses over those churches? But in wokeness, they worry about the underprivileged without all the other things that go there, and they abolish sin. Anyway, it's too complicated for tonight. I've got to write it down. But I think the churches, people in the churches have got some work to do there. And they touched on it a bit. They talked about Wilberforce. They talked about slavery. My background is Methodism. The Methodist revival happened at the end of the 18th century, early 19th century. Wilberforce wasn't a Methodist, but John Wesley, well, he wasn't either, he was an Anglican, but he was one of the people onto Wilberforce about slavery. And there was a revival in the church then. So, you know, I think there's some work to be done outside political circles. I was concerned that their slogan was that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I think that's dangerously close to the idea of being on a wrong or a right side of history. And my observation is that the arc doesn't bend anywhere. We've got to bend it. And it's our job to get out there and fight for things. And again, if you look at our literature, we say that the future will not look after itself. And I think this conference was a good start to bringing people together. What I got out of it was networks talking to people, the opportunity to hit on people and say, well, would you like to come to Australia? I don't know whether I can fund you, but first things first, are you interested in a date? If you are, well, let's see whether we can do something about it. I think the conference needs to develop. There was, again, I think it was people talking to a mass of people, but there wasn't a lot of opportunity to feedback. I think maybe some sort of breakouts where you can have more of a traditional conference where people can ask questions and maybe have a panel of different people on a subject where they can agree or disagree. I mean, there was disagreement. You had Catherine Burwell-Singh, who's the strictest headmistress in the world. She kept bringing everything back to multiculturalism. She's in a London school which has a lot of multicultural aspects to it. Yet John Howard was quite happy to say, perhaps there's a slight reaction to it later on, that he's never been comfortable with multiculturalism. I have to say, I've never been comfortable with it. I think we have a culture of pluralism. We've got a culture. We don't have multiple cultures. Jordan Peterson filled an interesting role. I think he could be our St. Paul. For those of you who aren't particularly Christian, Paul never met Christ. He had this experience, had this vision, decided he knew all about it and went off and started turning people into Christians. It took him about 11 years to get back to the apostles in Jerusalem. They weren't sure what they were going to get when they saw him. But he was an intense person. If you listen to or read any of his epistles, sometimes it's a bit hard to work out whether he knows what he's talking about. And I get that sense with Jordan Peterson. But there's a story, I think, that sums St. Paul up, and I think you could see Jordan in this, where he was talking to midnight in a house in a place called Troas, and a young boy called Eutychus fell asleep and fell out of the third-story window. He died. Paul went down, brought him back to life, went back up, and then kept talking to dawn. I could see Jordan Peterson offering a bit of psychoanalytical solace in the middle of the speech, and then keeping on going. That's enough of my reminiscences of it. I think now what I'd like to do is open it up to you. You ask perhaps first questions about things that you might not understand or whatever, and then if we could sort of merge that into where you think from your understanding it might be possible to take this phenomenon. And I'd add to that there was mention at the conference, I thought, Amanda, of perhaps doing a local one in Australia, because I have to say it's a hell of a long way to go, especially economy class. Right, so ladies and gentlemen, yes?
Ultimately, it's going to have a political manifestation to get changed, otherwise it's just a talk fest. And the problem on the Liberal side of politics, the Liberal Party, especially the state Liberal, is a state of complete collapse. And where it's going to end up, I don't know. Federally, 50% really are in the wrong party. And the thing can't be regressed without a political dimension. The other point is, and this is coming out in America, the root of our problems over the last 30 years are the universities. And there has to be a determined attack on the credibility
introduction, man, and then Amanda, because you're one of the organisers.
Look,
to respond to that.
Look, I personally agree with the privacy question that we have a big problem in the main Conservative Party being a Liberal Party in terms of the political representatives who are actually in the parliaments. But that's why I said what I said, because I think we have to really start to stand up and influence them, and it's going to be a long, drawn-out process. And I think the importance of ARC is that it actually gives them things that they can talk about. It actually gives them a foundation, which so many of them lack. And I think that's one of the biggest problems, that they're very all our politicians are very transactional and pragmatic, and well, there's a poll and I've got to do this, and there's not the desire to actually make a stand on whatever the issue is on a matter of principle and try and convince. So the last person who tried to do convincing was probably John Howard, from the right side. Well, Tony Abbott had a bit of a go as well, but that's where it ended. So yeah, I agree with that. As for the universities, I'm not sure of the way to go, but again, it's if we build a movement, if we have ARC Australia 2024 or 2025, if we get, we've got James Allen is not here tonight from the University of Queensland, but there are people like him in the universities, and we need to, he needs to be involved, and ARC is a support base for him in terms of ideology, philosophy, and that's where it goes from there. That's how it happens. It's a movement that has to be built.
Good contribution, I think. I'm a little bit more optimistic about the prospects of those who serve in our parliaments, but I think it is significant to say that there were lots of parliamentarians in attendance, and they had been supported to be there to help provide that strong philosophical and evidence base to be able to fight more effectively in their home jurisdictions from a position of values. It was about giving them the tools and the words and the numbers to quote that they needed to be able to be effective in making these arguments. And so I think it contributed constructively towards making all of those who serve in our parliaments get better and better at what they do. In relation to the education question, there's lots of different ways that it could be approached, but I'm really encouraged by movements that I see in the community to use good old-fashioned competition to lift the standard. When I see alternate universities starting to operate and flourish, when I see alternate schools being established around a stronger values proposition, to me, that's what civil society is meant to do. See a problem and as a community go and fix it, rather than say, woe is me, I want a government to fix my universities. And so maybe there's room in the cultural work of ARC that's about helping us remind ourselves of the opportunities that exist to change the paradigm by our individual action in our everyday lives.
Ben?
Thank you, Ben Beattie. We've talked a little bit about ARC and about some of how the world is coming undone in the West. So the end game, so you've got stratification of society, cost of living, net zero is a champion of that. Families being split up, transgender and things, taking care of that. And there's a whole host of areas in that. So I guess why, how is, who and why is this happening? Is my question. Has ARC got, anyone talk about that at the ARC?
How we got here?
Well, I think we got the how, which is, I've talked about like net zero is talking about driving up cost of living through scarcity, and that's going to stratify society, the haves and have-nots. It's a divide and conquer. We're taking on the families being split up, and as you tap them out, the education system is splitting up kids, and everyone's going in their separate ways instead of focusing on the groups and the communities and the family values. So again, the values. I guess we can see it happening, but what's driving it? I mean, is there a greater conspiracy theory, or is it just the inevitability of who we are as humans? It's a tough question, I know.
Dan wants to have a go. I think the most convincing answer that I've heard in recent times is that it's the critique that's been offered by the guys in the National Conservatism movement, people like Viram Hazoni. And what they essentially have said is that liberalism in itself contains a sort of seed of its own demise. It always wants to break through a barrier, break through a boundary, redefine things. And so there's no natural limiting principle to or reason why a nation should have a border, why a person that exists on the other side of the world should be as equal a member of a citizen tomorrow of Australia or Britain or France or God knows where else. On the day our conference was being held in London, there were very energised, very passionate, very mobilised members of who are nominally British, marching down the streets, chanting "Death to Israel" and all the rest of it, right? I think ARC was great, but my criticism, and I understand why they did it, they didn't want to avoid some hot button issues, but I mean, immigration is massive. It's redefining nations. And we have to sensibly, constructively, reasonably, and all the rest of it, just be clear that nations will be destroyed if we don't stop mass immigration, full stop. Secondly, on the family stuff, yeah, I mean, there has been, in the last the last 20 years, a philosophical notion that individual freedom is not tethered to anything else, family or otherwise, and that doing what you want is the highest good, and that's been celebrated, that's been incentivized, the policy has been, a perversion of Milton Friedman's free to choose. You do whatever you want. And as nations, as policymakers, we need to be clear that no. We will change policy, we will invest funds to make the country in which we live, in the society in which we live in, pro-family. It's more than just a pep talk. It's more than just like believe, or we need to believe in ourselves. I mean, it's all very good, and it's very good. There was a little bit too much of that, I thought, and without really grasping the nettle on some of these people like Miriam Page, people like Louise Perry, Vivek Ramaswamy. Those guys are a new generation of guys that realise we are not living in Reagan's America. And he was great for his time, different era, different time scale for different measures.
Thank you. I'd like to raise this issue of universities because I think it's terribly overlooked and it's fundamental. Particularly the number of students we've got in universities being treated with an extremely different culture than we're used to. I was a dean in the university. I graduated from 7 universities, 4 in Australia and 3 overseas. I'm not speaking from ignorance. I finished my latest doctorate a month ago. And we're producing Australia's next leaders with a complete lack of the sense of humanity. They have no sense of what it's all about. I've got 10 grandkids who've got careers running out of their ears. And they do not speak the same conversation that I do. They just have no understanding of the values that we see as important, Christian values. And it is, I mean, in history, a lot of revolutions have been driven by universities and university students. Don't underestimate the value of what we're producing for the future. It's terrible. It is absolutely terrible. And unless we find an answer, we're going to have people pouring out of those universities, and it's being aggravated by the fact that every parent wants their child to go to university instead of becoming a plumber or whatever. So we're aggressively adding to the pool all the time of people who have the wrong set of values. In fact, most of them don't have any values. And if you look at the policies that universities are producing, such as gender, etc., pronouns, people talk. But we've got the Defence Force doing the same sort of thing. But don't underestimate the value of the 500,000 students we've got in universities that are being driven along the wrong path.
Put it very eloquently. Lady behind. I'll get to you, John Brent. Lady in front.
Thank you. Just following on from that comment and your comment earlier about Vivek, I wonder which do you see and from the Art Conference, which generation is going to have the most influence on the decisions that are going to be made in the next few years? So I was born in 1976. I think I'm right on the cusp of Gen X, Gen Y. I've got employees who are Gen Y, who are kind of just late 20s, but they're like the new. I think they're just starting to mature at the late 20s, thinking about actually settling down and being normal. And I'm a parent to Gen Zs. So I'm interested to know, with all the speakers that you heard, like, is there a you were talking about the social influences there. Is there a generation that we should be trying to get a message of these values across to that will have a much broader reach?
Good question. I think any kind of substantial change in culture has to involve at least a few generations at any given time. And it makes sense that simply by the nature of the passage of time, those that are at the younger end of the speakers and attendees are going to have, at the very least, a longer period of impact, and they have not, we would hope, yet peaked. So I do think there is value in investing in that group and in leveraging the digital native quality that they bring, and as a consequence their ability to reach people outside the room. But that said, you shouldn't, I think, as the flip side of that, dismiss the understanding of history, the lifetime of research and understanding of everybody else.
Definitely not. And one thing, I'm only speaking from a small group of people, the people that work for us, but that generation Y, they don't see the age differences that we did. They love talking to people from the generation above and the generation below. I think that's what I find really interesting. They don't say, oh, that's too old, I'm not going to listen to them. They're quite happy to hear those conversations.
That's a good observation.
I think there was an answer in the art. It wasn't one I was necessarily comfortable with because of what I did when my kids were younger, which was that families have got to take a lot more responsibility. So when you say who's going to do it, well, you are, we are, I am. So I might have missed the mark with my my kids, but hopefully there'll be some grandkids.
It was also, Graham, though, I thought definitely, especially in that Erica Commissar speech, she was saying that's all true, parents should do that and the rest of it, but it's a completely unfair fight. Parents versus billion-dollar tech companies, right? And kids you want to get onto that. So we have to be a little bit more comfortable than maybe we might have done in the 80s or whatever, with a stronger government protecting people from the harms that social and otherwise that are sort of amply documented, right? I mean, otherwise it is just mum and dad versus, Google.
I'll have a go. I'm not going to necessarily disagree with you. I was like this. Thank you, Graham. Let me have a go. You never know. I might be on a Unity ticket. So this year we've gone through this extraordinary experience where, all the media, all the legal fraternity, the judges, the politicians, everybody, business, etc., all backed, yes. And basically, Middle Australia, Howard's battlers, Menzies Forgotten People said, get nicked. Okay? So that gives me confidence. And everything, and it was all, like the dollars deployed, the forces were completely unequal. What it says to me is that, and perhaps I'm answering your question in a way, that inherently there is an opportunity to actually reach out to people who have, and I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but if they haven't been contaminated by a university, they perhaps have more common sense and real world smarts than those that have been through our premium tertiary institutions. And so I say that's where the battle's to be fought. I say those people are the ones who need to be told that we support you and your family and your right to earn a living and build something positive for you and your family and to bequeath wealth to your kids, etc., and just government in your lives. I think there's a powerful message there, and ARC will plug right into that. And what we have to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we have to build a movement.
Graham, first of all, I'd like to compliment each and every one of the members here tonight, the panel, for attending and putting forth what I think would be a truly Queensland and Australian view of the world, and interacting with people. Good on you, well done. Unfortunately, my invitation had to be declined given carrots weren't of the value they should have been, so I had to afford the trip. So I had to remain at home and look at an odd, whatever it is you view on that screen over there. Probably, given my, apart from Don Cameron, who's here tonight, who spent a long time in elected life, and myself for about 40 years, I feel pretty wondering why I wasted my time in public life. Because quite frankly, I've seen the corporate movement, and perhaps clearly demonstrated by the recent referendum, going out on the tree and vote yes, whatever. I organised 62 booths in the seat of right. We managed to secure a 70% no vote, and I must say that it was very humbling to be able to talk to real people on the ground day after day and see what their view was versus corporate people who had another view of the world. So I'd be very interested to know how you feel the corporate people that were at ARC, were they somewhat a different group of corporate people to those disappointing, disillusioned individuals who lead our corporate world in Australia?
Great question. There was really strong attendance from people who had crafted lives as successful business people. But they tended to be people who ran private businesses, not the kind that ran a public company. We extended invitations to people who were leaders of, your top 20 ASX kind of companies. And there wasn't the same level of engagement as there was from those in the privately held capital part of the economy. To me, that makes perfect sense, because one group is part of the problem and another is part of the answer. That said, ARC will be more successful if we can create an environment where more and more of those corporate types feel like they are going to find it a nourishing experience to be there, a room they can be welcomed into, and that they will be able to learn and make useful contacts and the like from being a part of it. So I think that's an area for growth, but the business people who were there brought lots of really good information, life experience, wisdom to the table that did make it a lot better. It's definitely an area in which more good could be done. I don't think your contribution in public life is
If I might just digress on the point of universities, I'm up here at the invitation of the IPA. I'm a philosopher, and I'm speaking to a group from Queensland University tomorrow night in contest with Tony Abbott, I'm afraid to say, but because he's got a separate event. But I did want to say that there is a response in the universities where you can get to talk to them. They really want to find out about reason, which they don't hear anything about. They don't. They have no idea that there was a philosopher called Aristotle who discovered something called reality. Really, they do not know that there was a philosopher who discovered reality, that it is fully knowable, and he was also a philosopher who emphasized individuals. Now, you mentioned the importance of Christianity and Christian values. The great crossover between Christianity and Aristotle was in the Renaissance, when the church embraced his philosophy. And that was the beginning of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. That's where they came from. And it was a fantastic thing. Now, I want to ask you a question, because it's very important to me, whether the Enlightenment or Aristotle or the Renaissance got much of a mention. Because I think we have to stress both things. We really have to teach kids today reason. we must teach them reason and reality as well as values. So I would like to know if that was brought up as a topic.
There weren't speeches on Aristotle at the conference, but it rated a mention, and I think Jonathan Pagdu and certainly Robert Barron would have certainly well aware. And you know, people will have different historical interpretations and disagreements and the rest of it, right? So there was certainly all of that. Yeah, look, I mean, it was not unsympathetic to Western civilization, and that sounds rather sort of meek. Yet it's so unusual in universities or political conferences and the rest of this, and sort of an embarrassment where there wasn't an embarrassment at that function really. So why should there be? It's all to good.
Thank you. And can I add to what you said by saying the very fact that someone like Jordan Peterson turns out the audiences that he does among young people tells us there's a hunger for people to understand where they fit in the universe and how to go about leading a responsible, rational life.
Yes, may I add, he's a great champion of reason.
He is. And the fact that he was able to fill the O2 Arena on the last day of, and that's right, 20,000 largely young people, largely male, but not all. There was still a good representation from the ladies, and interestingly, all walks of life, tradesmen, labourers, through to the very educated. That speaks, I think, to what you've observed on campus.
Great.
Sorry to be, thanks, just to add a couple of things. So, ARC ended on the Wednesday night. Lisa and myself met up with our daughter and her young friend in the North Greenwich area at the O2, and we came out of the restaurant having had dinner, and there was this massive crowd queuing up. And as Amanda just said, I'll say there was just men and women everywhere, and quite a lot of younger people. Well, there were lots of young people in their 20s, and we thought they were going to a sporting event or something, I don't know, arm wrestling or something. But it wasn't, but then we found out the next day that it was Jordan Peterson. It was extraordinary. And I think the thing that I'd say this evening again, and I'm going to keep saying it, is we need to build a movement. And, if he can draw people, then there'll be others that can, if you like, be people around him who can do the same thing, and there were that evening. And we have to build on that, because there's a thirst in our young people's minds. This is my point. There's a thirst there for something. And Jordan Peterson's message, in a way, yes, it can be seen as religious and Christian. It can also be quite secular, but far more powerful in that they're giving young people something to think about rather than looking at a device and a meaningless life. He's actually saying, think of others, work for others, have a life of meaning. It's a big part of his message. So that's important. He's a key figure in this.
Just a very brief anecdote. I mentioned on the Thursday I caught up with a business person who actually been to the World Economic Forum, and was interested in his thoughts. The lady who was taking me around the office was at the Jordan Peterson event, and she was like a 23-year-old. Because I was a bit sheepish, way over here on conference and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, well, I went to this conference last night, and blah, blah, blah. So, it just goes to show that sort of those coming through the ranks to be optimistic.
I'll just add that I thought that there could have been something other than the sort of Christian humanism, I suppose, running through it. The makeup of the conference was probably intersecting sets of Christendom and the British Empire. So I've never run into so many serious Anglicans in my life before. All sorts of... they were all over the place, and I think it might reflect Philippa Stroud's where she is. But a lot of people from Africa. There weren't as many Americans as I expected. I didn't hear a lot of American accents, and a lot of people from Eastern Europe. But it did cross my mind that, is this sort of culturally related to Europe only, how does it reach out to, say, the Indian subcontinent, where Christianity is not going to ring that many bells? How do you deal with China? I think there's probably some work there that the people involved in the conference, but the rest of us have to do, because one of the reasons I think that people like Jordan Peterson, and certainly Ione Hursiali, she's interesting, you know, she's gone from being a Muslim to being a Christian. And I think part of it is that it's difficult to insist on ultimate realities about truths and what's right and wrong without some idea of a transcendent. And that's Christianity in our civilization, but it isn't necessarily in others. But if you don't have that sort of idea of transcendent truth, then it's basically utilitarianism, and that in its worst form ends up being fascism. So I think there's a real philosophical question there that needs to be tackled by everyone on our side of the argument. You won't get the Mark Lathams either on the Christian, and you need those.
If I had the can move, maybe Mark can go. It's been a long journey with you, right?
All right, okay.
Thank you very much. Very much enjoyed all your takes on the conference. My question is, I noticed a few of you referred to the possibility of the ARC conference or movement potentially forming a replacement to the World Economic Forum or other similar think tanks or organisations. And I think for it to seriously present a possibility of doing so, you need to sort of develop or win over a counter-elite in society. And I think a lot of people have mentioned universities, and I think that's very key in doing that. And there has been some mention, though, that we won the voice, 60% of Australians voted no, and I think that's all well and good. But I've worked as an economist for the government. I've worked in industry, for industry and for the private sector, and I tell you, in my generation, there's not many people who share your values, whether you want to accept it or not. And so my question is, how do you develop networks? How do you basically turn back the tide and develop a counter-elite that can present a viable alternative to the present system? Generation Z.
I've got no idea what these generations are. I'm waiting for Generation AA.
It's Alpha, Greg.
It's Alpha.
I'll take it through it.
Someone characterised it as wanting to replace Davos man with conservative man. Not quite sure whether that was exactly what happened. Does anyone want to, just one person on this, because there's a few people want to ask questions, and we'll be here all night if we have a tripartite answer to everything.
I think you're right to observe that among the young, the battle isn't won, but I think it's also right to observe that there are lots of people who go with the flow, lots of people who look for leadership, and lots of people who are persuadable if faced with compelling arguments, strong leadership, and the cultural change that comes with it. These can be seen as problems or they can be seen as opportunities, and there's a huge opportunity for capable young and youngish people of principle to step up and shine.
There's people want to ask questions, but there's also people starting to leave, so I've got a bit of a tightrope here. Daryl, I've got Don. There's a cluster of hands down there. Do you want to negotiate between the four of you, and I'll take two? Daryl.
Just off topic that I want to get to.
Straight to the question, then, Daryl, if that's okay.
I went to pre-poll on the no vote at West End, and there were about 6 or 7 young people outside who were working for the no vote. They were all Queensland University students, and they were part of a very large group of Queensland University students that actively worked on that. That's part of it. My understanding is that what the ARC is supposed to be is an apolitical movement countering those who don't know, and I'm sure the panel do know, Davos is not something that just meets once a year. It is a massive organisation. It has committees, chambers throughout the world, in just about every country in the world. They have meetings continuously throughout the year. They are continuously making policy. And the number of politicians that, and leaders, business communities that are in those chapters, and all this information is available, but the number of leaders of our world that are involved in Davos is quite staggering. The only way that ARC has to compete with that is, as you say, Campbell, it has to become a movement. It has to start with committees. It has to start with small groups and buildings.
So I think that's a vote in favour of doing something in Australia sooner rather than later. Is that how we would have done? Don coming. No. Sorry. No. Sorry, now two people they've negotiated over here, so there's another two there, and I think that'll be it. No. No,
Graham, I'm part of the AAA group at 83, going up for 84. But the lady behind me said she was born in the 1970s, and I envy her very greatly. But one observation I just want to make to the gathering tonight, I have access to the Spectator magazine, and a friend of mine, well, Paul Everingham, who used to be the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, has access to Michael Bowman, who is a contributor. And Michael's article that comes out on Friday covers the huge differences that have come upon the Australian religious breakup in our lifetimes. When I was very young, the difference in the Christian denominations often were deep in animosity. We live in a world today where Christians of all denominations seem happy to embrace each other as Christians, and you don't hear bloody mix or Anglicans or all this kind of stuff anymore. And I know, Graham, you went to Villanova where you were the best student. Well, you were given the awards up there, and the religious trophy didn't go to you because you weren't of the Catholic faith and you were of a Methodist family.
That's your assumption.
That's what you told me 30 or 40 years ago. Okay, so I've just got a good memory. But the only thing is that I'm asking that if people have access to Michael Bowen's full-page article on Friday or thereafter, The Spectator, he has really put an incredible effort into the changes that have come upon the Australian population, and I'm not going to name religious groups, but of differences that now exist, and the huge numbers and the intolerance to many things that represent our way of life. Full stop. And Graham, thank you for organising this. I've never been to one before, but utterly worthwhile.
Thanks. So, the lady in...
Second that. Thank you very much, Graham, for tonight's just excellent.
Speak up.
So I'm a little bit more into the economy and what drives the Australian economy. We've just come back from a wonderful, wonderful experience in Canada and America, and on our way from Toronto to Niagara Falls, there were just so many car manufacturing plants. It was just unbelievable. Canada. We can't manufacture cars here anymore. The amazing devastation in the American Civil War is just, and the destruction that went on there, the beautiful men that died, the beautiful men from wonderful, wonderful families throughout America that died over slavery. So if we are fortunate enough to pull off an arc here, may I suggest humbly that modern day slavery be one of the themes. So that was about slavery. Now we have open southern borders in America with very, very poor, desperate people streaming through into America with all the criminals from all over the world. Now, maybe there's a theory that far right-wing companies can take advantage of that slave labour coming through the southern border. We have our biggest Chinese trade, our biggest trading partner with China, the Uyghurs. They've enslaved the Uyghurs. So we can't have high-paid car manufacturing industry here. Oh, no, no, no. So basically what's happening, and please, Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong, you know, we've got the miners, we've got the farmers, you know, financing this great big welfare state. The question is, modern slave labour coming out of Silicon Valley and how it's damaged and devastated the Australian taxi industry. Can you please address that? Thank you.
So I think that's really just a request to, if you're involved in organising, or any of the rest of us are involved in organising something here to have that as, yeah.
Modern form of slavery.
Yeah.
Yeah, good contribution. Thank you.
Yes.
My question is probably for Amanda. Amanda, you talk about politicians being chiefly interested in economics and then less so in socio-cultural issues. Barclay and I are just back from the Australian Monarchs League's conference in Sydney, and I was wondering, my question to you would be, do you think ARC has A, a responsibility, and B, scope to engage on constitutional matters as well as socio-economic and socio-cultural matters as well, particularly as, from an Australian perspective, it looks like the next referendum that we will see will be one that will be to implement a republic or not.
Thank you for the question. We quite deliberately didn't go into the nuts and bolts of what made each of the contributing nations' version of the liberal democracy different, lest we get into the discussion about, you know, whether the US Constitution with its Bill of Rights is better than the Australian version, or, you know, any other manifestations of that debate. One thing that I did pick up on, though, particularly in our discussion of, you know, whether or not we had contributions from the subcontinent, from Asia, from parts of Africa, although we did have a pretty good African attendance, there was a decision taken that those in what we would, in a broad sense, call Western countries needed to get their own house in order before they started telling Asia or anywhere else how to go about living their lives. That's not to suggest that there aren't problems, like what happens to the Uyghurs and so forth, that aren't clear moral issues for us in our time. But it's to say you can't do all things in 3 days, and we were pretty clear about what the focus was. So I can't see constitutional matters being front of mind, say in round 2, but it might be something that's relevant in an Australian version or a regional version, particularly given the influence of the Australian Constitution throughout the Pacific.
I'd just like to add, look again, ARC was at the very high strategic level. It's very much about culture and values. It's up there. And if it comes here as well, that's what it needs to be doing, because that's what it needs to do. Because again, going back to what I was saying, I sort of addressed earlier on, the problem with so many politicians, and I'll plead guilty from my time, I was sort of confessing to that, is there needs to be, you know, our Liberal and Liberal National Party politicians need a course in what they are actually meant to be fighting for, and it starts with values.
Yeah. Can I just add something else though? I do think that the roll-up, there are plenty of interesting ideas, podcasts and the like, you can get most of the speakers that you want to access from ARC that attended through those means. But I do think that the value is in building an institution, and that involves structures and all these conferences that the WEF have, and has been alluded to. That's where I do think this organisation lies, because it does have heft. It does have credibility. The people there can't be dismissed as fringe, regardless of what Albanese says. So that is important. And I do think this line that is constantly put out by people on our side, that politics is downstream for the culture, etc., is an excuse in many ways. And it's actually not true, because once you change the law, you change the culture, like dramatically over time, and often you change public opinion in due course once that law is changed. So it's important that you have an ARC, credible, maybe a little bit more normie than some of the Libertarian Fest and the rest of it all, doing what it does. It can't be dismissed. It gradually builds out, is perfectly respectable in the boards of BHP and the rest of it, so that crazy policies coming in from a very crazy angle can't be just sort of implemented by default.
Yep. So one more last question. Yeah.
Randall Williams, one of the things that I really got out of your address was the significance of hope, and the primacy of hope offered for coming out of ARC, as opposed to that which we really regularly see in the media. And I'm conscious of the fact that Lord Kenneth Clark, in his magnificent work on civilisation, really defined the key significance of civilisation is that people have hope that there will be something tomorrow. It's worthwhile investing in the future if you know there's something tomorrow. So I'd really be asking for a reflection from you as to the hope that you saw that came out of the conference for our civilisation.
All right, just one of you, I think. So which one? Said enough?
Kenneth Clark would have fitted right into that conference.
Yeah, well, look, I go back to my opening remarks. Motivational, inspirational, uplifting. I came out, I walked out on I was 2 inches tall, which is a good thing. For quite a few days. I mean, the feeling has subsided, to be honest, but I really was inspired. So I got hope out of it. And if we could replicate that here, get, instead of 1,500 people from around the globe, if we could get 1,500 Australians in a room, and then we could have art conferences and chapters. We go back to this thing, we've got a political movement, then it goes from there. And that's how we turn around, the people, in their 20s and whatever who think differently. It's built brick by brick.
Okay. No, you've got plenty of time to ask people to spare time.
Graham, can I just interrupt and steal 20 seconds just to say that ADH TV has all of the ARC content. They invested a lot of, part of the culture war is getting out there and supporting the people who are fighting the culture war at the front lines. A lot of people at ADH TV volunteer their time, they donate a lot of money to get this thing going. This is Alan Jones' platform. So adh.tv on any web browser. You can also download an app on your phone, but please don't watch these on YouTube. When you watch them on YouTube, you are supporting the enemy. I'm serious. We've got to get tough and we've got to start fighting. If we're going to win this culture war, we've got to get in the trenches with the people who are fighting. And we need your support. Okay? I do a show every Friday night on ADH called The Other Side Australia. I do it for free. I'm in AIP, but we've got to get behind each other and we've got to support each other. So please forgive me for taking that 1 minute. I just want to make that point.
So Damion's also on our board.
I was.
30-second comment. Okay. You've got 30 seconds, Graham.
Like a commercial, isn't it? 30 seconds. Everyone's been talking. Everyone's been talking about. Everyone's been talking about the upper level and the inspiration. But what we need in Australia, and we're going to do it, you'll be pleased to know, is on the ground institutional support. But the Americans set up the Tea Party, right? It was an organisation on the ground locally. We're going to set up a foundation. I'm the guy who set up the Red Unions. 5 more seconds. And and I just want to let you know that we're going to do it, and we'll be looking for your support to go. We're going to go local and set up a whole group of town institutions all around Australia to start to influence the local situation.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask you to show your appreciation for these people. We've also got something a little bit more tangible that they can take home. So, thank you all for coming along tonight. If you like what you saw, please have a look at our website and join up. Movements don't exist without members. So we need more than we've got, and we'll never have enough. So please have a look at the website, have a look at what we're doing. It's not just this sort of stuff. We're working on housing policy and the disinformation bill, a whole lot of things to do with free speech, etc., etc. So if you're a member of the IPA, you should be able to find room for us, and we're not that different. We even have the same initials, and we have a friendly relationship with the CIS as well. So we welcome people from all political parties. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry. The food is courtesy of Pino Foods, who sponsor us. So. I should also thank Marilyn, who's also one of our directors, but comes along and works to tail up on these functions, and Barclay, who put off celebrating his graduating with an economics degree to come along and And John Cameron, I thought you wanted to know what to do with
he wants to put them on the table. He's a Scotsman.
Oh, yeah, you can put them on the table on the way out.
Yeah.
Oh, John thinks you should all put your name tags on the table on the way out. If you're not on our mailing list, leave a business card as well and we'll sort that out. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.